The Iowa International Center Dialogue Series is a monthly educational program available at no cost to the public, thanks to the generous support of DuPont Pioneer and supporting sponsors. Dialogue events and videos offer a unique opportunity for our community to engage in and learn from important cultural conversations with international experts, and to draw on and highlight the extensive knowledge these individuals bring to our schools, workplaces, and community. For more information about the Dialogue Series and the Iowa International Center, please visit www.iowainternationalcenter.org.
Now it is my really distinct pleasure to introduce very briefly, so you have all the time to listen to them, this extraordinary panel on a very timely topic, driver's licenses for unauthorized immigrants. Not illegal, unauthorized is the correct term, and thank you, Lori Chesser, for pointing that out to me. Lori Chesser, one of the best-known immigration attorneys, not only in Des Moines in the state of Iowa, but in the country. Chief Tupper, Chief of Police from Marshalltown. Michael Tupper is here even on his vacation, so we have a special thank you for Chief Tupper coming. And I'm going to call you Dr. Hendricks. Sarah Hendricks has written on the subject, and so I'm going to turn it over to the panel. They will be talking, and then as there is an opportunity, they will take questions. And Rich is willing to take questions as well. Who would like to begin?
Hello, thank you all for being here. My background is sociology, so I'm going to be focusing on the reasons why driving for unauthorized immigrants, driver's licenses for unauthorized immigrants is important both for the individuals as well as for our communities. I want to start by surveying you all who are here today. I'd like you to raise your hands if you have a car available in your household. Who has a car available? Pretty much everybody. Raise your hand if you do not. Is there anybody who lives in a household without a car available? Okay, I want to bring this up because I think it's really important for us to recognize that it's easy for us to overlook how important driving is in our lives. And so when we talk about driver's licenses, it's really easy to not understand how important it is in other people's lives as well. Oops. Okay, I want to also start with this picture. This is a picture of a woman pushing a stroller across a highway. There are 3 lanes on either side. 1, 2, 3, 4 lanes? 4 lanes on either side. No, it's 3 lanes. It's the angle. Sorry, 3 lanes on either side of this road, high-speed road. There's no sidewalks, no crosswalks, no stoplights. She's pushing a stroller. Presumably, there's a baby inside the stroller. If you look closely, there's another child walking on the other side of her with a backpack on. So, in essence, this woman is risking her life by walking across the street with her children. What could possibly be so important that she risks her life to do this? Well, travel is an absolute necessity for us to be able to live, to be able to meet our needs, to be able to grow. And so sometimes there's really no other option than to get out and risk their lives. Sometimes, a lot of times, people without cars, people without driver's license, people who don't drive, just don't travel as much. A lot of times people turn to walking, and walking works if your destination is within walking distance. In our country, the infrastructure is built assuming, as many of us do travel around by cars, that people travel around by cars, and so there's just not the infrastructure for walkers in many places, and there's also the spatial locations of institutions and resources and residential areas are set up so that driving is really a necessity. This also indicates how important driving is. This is from the National Household Travel Survey. 83% of trips made by households in the United States is done in a private vehicle. The second most common mode of transit, of travel, is walking, and that accounts for 10% of the trips. After that is public transit. Now, this is the whole United States, so the public transportation is available only in parts of the United States, and in those parts, it meets the needs of some people, but there are also people who do not live near public transit, or the timing or hours of the public transit doesn't meet what they need, and then there are a number of other modes as well of transportation. And so it's really, driving is really fundamental to our lives. And I think, and one last example of how it's so important to us, if any of you know of someone who perhaps has become older or has physically lost the ability to be able to drive safely, you probably know how hard it is for so many people to give up those keys. Giving up those keys means so much, because it means losing independence. It means needing to get rides places, perhaps. It might mean needing to move somewhere else. And so it might mean not being able to travel as much. And so that's another illustration of how important driving is in our lives. And I want to make the point that what's important for us, those of us who are born here in the United States, the best way for us to travel is also the best way for other people to travel. And so I want to talk about now a little bit about immigrants in this country. When I say immigrants, I refer to people who are born outside of the United States. So immigrants means foreign born. 80% of the U.S. population was born in the United States, and 13% of the U.S. population was foreign born. This 13% is about 40 million people who is an immigrant, who is born outside of the country. And of this 13%, about 6%, of this 13%, 6%, so between a third and a half of the foreign-born have become naturalized citizens. And then the remaining are not naturalized citizens. But that's a pretty substantial amount, proportion of foreign-born who have naturalized. Now, of the 40.2 million immigrants living in this country, people who are born in other countries, 72% have a valid legal have good legal standing, and then 28% is the estimate of the unauthorized population in our country. So the vast majority of immigrants, I want to point out, is here in good legal standing. 28% is unauthorized. People who are here unauthorized generally are here primarily because they have either had a visa, then they have overstayed the amount of time that they were allowed to stay given by the visa, or they crossed the border without a visa. So those are the two primary reasons people are here without authorization. So this is the population we're talking about primarily when we talk about unauthorized driver's licenses for unauthorized immigrants. Where are unauthorized immigrants from? And this is the United States population. 58% are from Mexico. 23% are from other Latin American countries. And then the remaining fifth or so, 20%, 11% are from Asia, East Asia, South Asia, 4% are from Europe and Canada, and 3% are from Africa and other nations. And so the majority of unauthorized immigrants are from Mexico, but it is not everybody. It really affects immigrants from all over the world. How about Iowa? In Iowa, there are about 75,000 people in this state without authorization. And it is pretty safe to say that most of these 75,000 people do not have valid driver's licenses. So this is the population we're talking about here. So let's turn to what does it mean not to have a driver's license. Not having a driver's license as I have mentioned already, it means that people probably don't travel much or don't travel as much. If there's, to give an example, if there's a household with a family living inside and perhaps the whole family, perhaps neither of the parents drives or neither has driver's licenses, the man, in this illustration, the man may carpool to work to be able to get to work to provide for the family. That leaves the mother and the children at home with no way to travel anywhere. And so I want to point out the amount of social isolation that would, that the family would be living in is pretty high. So not traveling as much leads to some level of increased social isolation. A lot of people turn to other modes of transit. People without driver's licenses, people without cars tend to walk more, but the number one, and take public transit more, but the number one way people get around is by carpooling. And carpooling is a partial solution. It is a solution that enables people to get to places where they're able to arrange a carpool for, which tends to be to work. You've got to get to work, so you arrange to be able to get a ride from someone to and from work, and maybe the grocery store once a week or once every so often. But that carpooling tends to be a solution to those trips. But there are a lot of trips that still are not made, a lot of locations people still cannot get to if they're able to carpool to and from work. So it doesn't mean that the problem is solved, that people are able to carpool. Another response that people have is some do drive without a valid license. That happens, and I want to point out again that because traveling is sometimes an absolute necessity, and the people who talk about traveling without a license talk about the fear that they experience when they travel without a license and how they'd really rather follow the law and drive with a license. But if it's not an option and they've got to get somewhere, then they have to do what they have to do. So I don't want to excuse it, but I also want to bring up an understanding for the reasons why people do drive without a license. Scholars who look at transportation barriers, especially among Latino immigrants in this country, have described the transportation limitations as forming a bottleneck to adaptation to our country, to our culture. Without transportation, there are a lot of locations people can't get to. Resources and institutions are located across space, and without transportation, there's a lot of places that are just not accessible. And I'm talking about beyond work, even talking about work. You can't stay late and work late if you rely on someone else for a ride, or you can't take off early because your child needs to go to the doctor if you depend on someone else for a ride. But beyond that, there's churches people go to, there's shopping trips people would want to make, there's school or educational opportunities, and if we're talking about the Latino immigrant population, think about English classes that some would want to attend that would not be able to do this because of lack of transportation. So there's a lot of destinations that are not available to people because they do not have transportation. And so that's why it's imagined as a bottleneck. Let's see. And for immigrants too, part of being able to get to places and participate in institutions, part of this is learning about our culture. And so not having access to transportation is also impeding the adaptation process to being able to live here and grow and become successful. And not only for the immigrants who have the first generation immigrants, but also their children. And the children are also growing up in our communities, and what they experience as children also will impact how they grow and into adults in our society. So that's also something that we should think about. And in terms of also not being able to get to a lot of locations, I'll share a couple stories with you. It's not only affects the immigrants themselves, but also the communities and the institutions, especially those who want to work with immigrants. There's in one of the studies, there was a social worker who provided parenting classes, and they provide it in English, and they could easily provide it in Spanish as well, and they give it in Spanish periodically, but the Spanish classes tend to have very low rates of participation. And this social worker said, but one time we had the funding to provide taxi vouchers, and that one time we had a lot of participation. Participation completely turned around. And so the participation in programs, the lack of participation can be perceived as lack of interest, but many times it may also be perceived, the real reason may be because they just can't get there. And so that's another example is that I want to share with you all is not being able to get to the children's schools. If you're a parent and you have children going to school, and if you're from another country, you may not, whether or not you're from another country, really, as a parent, I'm speaking as well, I'd want to be able to visit my child's school, I'd want to attend the parent-teacher conference, I'd want to be able to know what kinds of activities they're involved in. There's a woman who shared with one of the scholars who's done research focus groups on this. One woman shared that my child is gone from my house for 8 hours a day, participating in a world that I have no idea what's going on in that world. I can't get there. And so that's another way that, another specific example is how barriers to transportation really affect more than just the immigrants themselves, but also the institutions that serve the community institutions that serve the whole community, which includes immigrants. And it's becoming more and more recognized, the contributions that immigrants make to communities. And a number of communities, states and, not states, counties and localities are trying to learn about how to become more welcoming to immigrants. And it's recognized between 1990 and 2000, the Hispanic population growth has prevented overall population decline in over 100 non-metro counties. And this is more than a decade ago, many of which lost population in the 1980s. So it's, in some cases, the Latino immigrant community moving into a community really revitalizes the community and adds to the economic activity, adds to children in schools, adds to the services that the community needs in terms of filling in economic sectors that communities who are losing population may not have filled anymore. So I think that concludes my portion of the presentation. I want to just summarize by saying that in all the research I've done in terms of the individual and community effects, the consequences of driver's licenses for unauthorized immigrants, I haven't come across any disadvantage. What disadvantage do individuals or communities receive by not allowing people to travel and participate in the communities? So I will now hand it over to Chief Tupper. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name, again, is Mike Tupper. I'm going to tell you a couple things that I'm not. I'm not a public speaker, so I hope I don't put you to sleep. And I'm not a politician, thank goodness, okay? Politics kind of get in the way. Politics kind of get in the way of this, of a lot of issues, this issue especially. A few things that I am. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an Iowan, and I'm a small-town police chief. Those things are all important because public safety is important to me, and I'm sure to all of you. I've spent the last 22 years of my life in law enforcement, and I've learned a lot of things over the course of that 22 years. And sometimes it seems like 22 years going on 42. But one of the things that I've learned is it's important for law enforcement agencies to connect with their community. and to find ways to serve their entire community. I cannot be successful as a police officer or as a police chief unless the entire community feels a connection to our law enforcement agency in Marshalltown and feel like we're there to serve them, okay? And sometimes this immigration issue gets in the way of my primary mission to provide law enforcement services to our entire community. As you probably know, I live and work in a very diverse community. And Marshalltown, one of the reasons, I've been in Marshalltown about 3 years now, and I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to live and work in Marshalltown because it looks like the rest of the world. And Iowa is quickly becoming just like Marshalltown. And I think sometimes people struggle with change. I work in a police department, and I'm here to tell you, change does not go over well in law enforcement agencies. And so as a new police chief, a lot of things have changed. But I think that it's that way in communities. It's that way where you work. It's maybe that way in your household. Change doesn't go over well. But it's important that if we're going to grow as a community and as a state, that we embrace change and look for opportunities to welcome and serve everybody that lives in Iowa, not just a select few. As I stated, politics kind of get in the way of this issue, and I've been involved with this issue for several months now, and people try to make it a political issue. It's not for me. It's a public safety issue. That's what it comes down to, public safety. I truly believe that if we were able to license more drivers in Iowa and then those people can now get auto insurance, by the way. Would our roadways now be safer? And we're not asking for DOT to rubber stamp these driver's cards. We're really not. People that apply for these driver's cards should have to jump through the same hoops that you and I do to get our driver's license. But I believe in my community, I get out a lot and talk to people in our Latino community. We have a very large population of folks from Mexico. I believe that if they had the opportunity to do the right thing and get a driver's card, they would. And then they would also get auto insurance. These folks then, once they have that driver's card, you're not just going to be able to show up to DOT and say, I want one. You're going to have to prove that you understand the rules of the road. You're going to have to show competency. We're asking that they also show that they can get driver's or auto insurance and that they maintain that. We're asking that they prove that they actually live in Iowa, because for some folks, a lot of people are worried that if Iowa were to adopt this, then we'd have people from other states coming here to get the driver's cards and then they leave. We don't want that to happen, but if people live here in Iowa, they should have an opportunity to get a driver's card. Transportation was brought up by Sarah. Des Moines has a great public transportation system. It's not that way across Iowa. Okay, we have limited public transportation opportunities in most places, most communities in this state. So how are people going to get to church, get their kids to school, get to the grocery store, do the things that they need to do to get by? Okay, unfortunately, people drive out of necessity, whether they have a license or not. And by the way, that's not just Latinos that do that. A lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, race, gender, ethnicity, doesn't matter. If they need to drive, they're going to drive sometimes without a license, okay? You would be shocked at the amount of law enforcement resources that are wasted on a daily basis. I like to say we're chasing our tails with these driver's license issues. People no DLs or no insurance, things of that nature, that we could devote those resources to other things that are more important if people had an opportunity to get a driver's card. I believe, again, with the auto insurance issue, it's going to make the road safer. It's also going to reduce hit and run accidents. A lot of folks, they get in an accident, and the first thing they think is, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to jail because I don't have a driver's license, I don't have insurance. And then what are the consequences for some of these immigrants if they go to jail? They think they're going to be deported, okay? They also believe that local law enforcement is immigration police, and we're not, okay? That comes up frequently. I'm asked, Chief, why don't you just enforce immigration law? I don't have the jurisdiction to enforce immigration law. But a lot of folks in our community are fearful of that. And so I think they would feel much more welcomed in our community, and I think at the end of the day they're going to be much more cooperative with law enforcement if they had the opportunity to get this card. If any of you have ever had an interaction with law enforcement, for any reason, what's the first thing the police ask you? Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be a motor vehicle situation. If I'm investigating any kind of offense, any kind of crime, any kind of issue, the first thing I ask people is, who are you? And many times I'm going to say, do you have any identification? I'd like to be able to get an ID card that I can rely on and trust and reasonably believe that when that person gives me that card, that's actually who they are. And what happens many times in our communities, people just don't have a card, okay, or they don't have any identification. So now we're wondering who we're dealing with. And that creates an officer safety issue for your law enforcement people that are working in your communities. The other great thing about the DOT database is it's a crime-fighting tool for us. When you get a driver's license, your name goes in there, and that's how we find people with arrest warrants. That's how we find people that maybe have some driving issues, maybe shouldn't be driving, that sort of thing. Okay, that's how we do our job in many cases. 75,000 people might be able to be in that database that aren't now because we don't allow them to get a driver's card. I think it would allow my cops to be much more effective in doing their job if they could get that driver's card. Again, we're not asking for DOT just to let people have one because they show up. The other thing we're asking that people be able to do is actually prove who they are. And there are ways of doing that. The Mexican consulate was actually in Marshalltown a couple weekends ago, and they were helping people get their consular cards. And that's a very authentic and reliable form of identification that we can trust. And at the federal government level, they do accept those types of IDs for many different things. I think that could work in Iowa, okay? I certainly respect the fact that DOT doesn't want to just give out a card to somebody that says, I'm John Smith, give me my license, okay? The person should have to prove who they are. And quite frankly, we have to do that now, all of us in this room, okay? If I moved here from another state, I'm going to have to be able to prove who I am before DOT will give me a license. So we're not asking for anything special in that regard. This isn't an immigration issue. This doesn't mean amnesty for anybody. This doesn't mean that it changes their status in our country, any of that stuff. This just means that they can drive lawfully in the state of Iowa. And we truly believe that would help us do our job. And it's going to mean I can spend my resources on other things too, instead of chasing my tail after people that don't have driver's licenses or they get in a crash and they don't have insurance. So I would encourage everybody to visit iowasaferoads.com. There's a lot of information on there. Excuse me. There's a lot of information on there about what we're asking for. There's also a listing of people who support this endeavor. And I'm not the only chief in Iowa that supports this endeavor. There's a growing list of law enforcement people and sheriffs that are very supportive of this issue. We're very fortunate right here in Polk County. Sheriff McCarthy is one of the leaders of this effort and has been for a long time. Chief Bradshaw from Des Moines PD is also signed on, has been a leader in this initiative for a long time. Okay, these are important issues that we've been trying to get addressed in the legislature for a long time. If you support this, if you think it's a good idea, it's going to take a grassroots effort to get people to be convinced. Trust me, because I've been trying to convince a lot of elected people for a long time now, and they need to hear more voices. They need to hear from other people. They need to hear from you. I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end here, I don't want to take up too much time. But I just want to focus people on this as being a public safety issue. It's not an immigration issue, and many times people will try to politicize it into an immigration issue. It's all about public safety. I think it'll make our roads safer. We'll have more competent drivers. It'll make law enforcement's job easier, and when we have to deal with somebody in the field, they'll be able to give us an ID card that we can rely on and we know we can trust, and that's going to be make our job a lot easier as well. So I will turn it over to Lori.
Well, Chief Tupper, I want to say that you're an excellent public speaker, and I bet you'd make an excellent politician as well. That's the kind of politician we need. So I'm here to give you sort of the legal aspect and play, bat a little cleanup here, and I'll give you plenty of time for questions as well. So I want to talk about Real ID, because this comes up in the debate and will come up in the debate when people start talking about this bill again, assuming that it's proposed again in the legislature. Real ID was a federal law passed after 9/11 to make sure we know who people are when they engage in certain federal activities. Let's put it that way. So the federal government enlisted the help of the states to comply with Real ID and to effectuate Real ID by having driver's licenses and state-issued IDs comply with the Real ID Act. And I'm not going to go into all that mess because it's, I'm sure, a big mess of federal regulation, but a couple things you need to know. One is Iowa, of course, is totally on the ball, is Real ID compliant. One of the first states to have regulations and everything in place to be Real ID compliant. Second thing is Real ID isn't actually in effect yet. It keeps getting delayed. A lot of states aren't Real ID compliant. We are. What does that mean? It means that if you so choose, you can get a Real ID compliant driver's license or ID card, all right, in Iowa. You don't have to. You can choose not to be have a Real ID compliant card. In Iowa, those are the Real ID compliant cards are indicated on the face of the license. You have to go through some things to get a Real ID compliant card. When Real ID does in fact go into effect, that will mean if you don't have a Real ID compliant card, you cannot access certain federal facilities. You can't go into a federal facility that requires an ID, like a nuclear facility, research facility, and you will not be able to board a commercial aircraft, federally regulated aircraft. Those are the basic things. Right now, you don't have to worry about it, but eventually you will. So that's Real ID. And so Real ID says they want states to be compliant with Real ID rules, but not every ID has to be a Real ID compliant ID. Does that make sense? So right now, we have compliant and non-compliant IDs, and I bet if you looked at yours, some will have compliant and some won't have compliant IDs. So what's being proposed is an ID that would not be able to be used as a Real ID for federal purposes, but it would be totally compliant with the Real ID Act. Okay? So Rita's shaking her head. That means I said it right. Rita from the ACLU knows this law lots better than I do. But in any event, it means that Iowa would not be violating any federal law by doing what's being proposed. Okay? That's the main message. The Real ID Act does not prevent states from doing that. And in fact, I'll show you in a minute, a lot of states have done it. Okay, so that's important concept to make sure you understand. Okay, if the law changed, as Chief Tupper indicated, the only change would be how someone shows who they are, and of course they still have to show they reside in Iowa, but it would not change, they would change a little bit how they show who they are because of the certain forms of ID accepted, but the main change would be you don't have to show you have a valid legal status. Right now, we only give driver's licenses to people with valid immigration status, okay, which believe me, for my clients, many or most of which have valid immigration status, it's still a huge hassle because the coordination between the federal government and the state government telling them, are you in legal status, is not a perfect system, let's put it that way. So I spend a lot of time on the phone to driver's license people, licensing authorities as it is, just to explain to them that yes, my clients are legal, have a legal status. But in this case, if you're going to get one of these driver's cards, you would not have to prove your immigration status, okay? You'd still have to prove who you are and that you're an Iowa resident. And so we just have to change some ways that could be done. So that's the main change. Here's some examples. Here's one from Vermont. there's the Vermont driver's card, and you will note it says not for federal identification. So the card would have to be distinguished under the Real ID Act, would have to be distinguishable on its face from a regular driver's card, okay? So it could look something like this. Here's another one from Illinois. Not valid for identification, it says, which is kind of weird because it probably is valid for some identification, but not for federal identification. I don't know why you'd have it otherwise, but anyway. Here are the states that have, the states in green have laws that allow this kind of card. The states in red disallow it, and the other state, there you can't really see the shading, but the states in the shading, which includes Iowa, are considering it, okay? So we wouldn't be the first. So you've heard about a lot of benefits and challenges and things like that, and I just wanted to make sure we cover at least the ones that, I've heard about or thought of, some of which may have been covered, so I'll try to skip those. But, potentially more insured drivers, potentially educated drivers. One thing is just enumeration and identification of the population. Who's here? We think there's 75,000 undocumented. Who knows, right? Nobody knows. Those are estimates. So one thing, it would be beneficial to some degree, and I guess you could argue either side. Sometimes as a lawyer, I'm a little concerned that my clients might go in and say, hi, I'm an undocumented immigrant, or an unauthorized immigrant. A lot of the statutes say undocumented. On Vermont's, in fact, there's a website, how do you get a driver's license? And it says, if you're an undocumented immigrant, click here. And so, but anyway, so, I'm a little worried about that sometimes because I'm like, just like when they had the deferred action for childhood arrivals, I always would talk to them very seriously about, you are giving your name to the federal government. Please be aware of this. In the same way, if they pass this, we would be telling our clients, you are giving your name to the state government. Right now, we don't think the federal government will access that. I have no idea in the future. This is a brave act on your part. In any event, people could come forward, be enumerated, be identified, we'd know who they were, which of course leads to the ability to possibly detect crime. The DOT, in case you don't know, has facial recognition software. They can find, if you have a fake ID in any other state, they will find it and they will prosecute you. If you look like someone that does, they might call you in and make sure it's not you. If it's your aunt or uncle, they might call you in. But in any event, it's an amazing software, and they would be able to use that on everyone who signed up. So it has a lot of different law enforcement benefits that we could spend some time thinking about, and whether those would be good or bad, but there are law enforcement benefits. Another thing would be that it could dissuade some crimes against vulnerable population. The unauthorized population is a very vulnerable population because they might be afraid to go to law enforcement. And so people do prey on that population. Anything that can help community policing and help that population engage with law enforcement, I would think would be a benefit. And we already talked about integration through being able to travel. Now, it is a risk. When the deferred action passed, some of the people that went to get their driver's license had, unfortunately, registered cars in another name or under another ID. If they were within the statute of limitations, those people were prosecuted for that in Iowa. So people just need to realize that if they've committed some crime in the past, they could be detected by doing this. And, like I said, you're disclosing your ID to the federal government. Also, you'd be carrying around a card that says, basically, I may not have immigration status in the United States, right? So that could also lead, that and also just the fact that maybe there's a need for translation and things like that can lead to defrauding this population as well in trying to get a driver's license, or after they have a license, when people see that, that could be an identification for some crimes against them. I talked to some people in DOT, and they said in other states they reported that people were charging hundreds of dollars to translate for people trying to get one of these driver's cards. So that's something we need to think about. And so I think we've gone over most of the practical considerations, or you can think about them in your head, but basically if we've got some number of thousands of people that would then be signing up for a card, we do have a resource issue we need to address. We'd have more fees from that, of course. We need to think about what forms of ID are valid, and all these things are completely surmountable challenges, but just things that we need to think about. educating the DOT and, personnel, educating the public, educating employers, educating, there'll be some work. I mean, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. There will be some work. But, I hope this forum has helped you to overall see why we'd want to do it and think about, are these benefits worth it based on some of these practical considerations. I'm going to end there. We'll have 10 minutes for questions, and I'm sure we can fill the time if you can't. So please give us your questions.
As you ask your questions, I'll simply repeat it and direct it to whomever you would like to have answer it so that we can have it on video. And I would also just like to comment your concern and our concern that people without driver's license cannot, for example, access English classes. One of the things that the Iowa International Center has done, and you can see it on our website because there was a wonderful story last week by Channel 13, is provide ESL classes on site for that very reason, because there's no bus transportation at Deer Ridge, for example, a major apartment complex, and people living there, many of them refugees and immigrants, don't have a car. So that's one of the ways in which we've addressed that issue. So, question, Rob Dillard.
Can you remind us of the legislative status of this proposal? Has it been formally debated and voted down? Has it ever come out of committee?
The legislative status of this issue.
Okay, let me remind us, because I'm not following it as closely. Here, can we give her the mic?
In the 2013 legislative. Do you want to come up?
Yeah, really quick.
Sure. Yeah. It's a short answer, sadly, though. Okay. So Senator McCoy filed legislation that would allow for the DOT to start issuing these types of licenses following regulations that they would promulgate to protect against fraud by taking these consular IDs, that sort of thing. And that got a subcommittee hearing and passed out of subcommittee. So it made it through the first hurdle in the Senate in 2013. It died at committee. It was close to the final. In 2014, he introduced it again, and it didn't get a subcommittee meeting in time, sadly. So we need people to reach out to their legislators in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way and get them to understand that this really is a public safety issue.
Another question? Yes.
In the states that have passed this law, what's the success rate, I guess, if you will, number of unauthorized immigrants versus the number of driver's cards that are passed out?
The numbers of states who have passed it?
From what I've read and the studies that I've done, a lot of it's really new, and so I think it's too soon to tell. In New Mexico, they did see a very dramatic rise, though, in the number of people that have insurance, and their insurance compliance rate went way up. And they've had some success there. I think in the other states that are moving down this road, it's been fairly new, and it's still a work in progress.
It would take a few years, I believe, to get everybody, to get the people who are interested processed and licensed, and to work out also these practical considerations. And a number of other states that are ahead of us, most of them, I think, are in this process still. It's a good question, though.
I'd just like to add one thing about the political process, okay? We have to hold our elected representatives' feet to the fire on this issue and a lot of other issues, okay? I've talked to a lot of elected folks over the last year about this issue, and many of them will say, yeah, I support it, and if it comes up for a vote, I'll vote for it. But they've done absolutely nothing to make sure that it comes up for a vote. It's going to take a grassroots effort. If you support this, it's going to take you getting in a hold of your elected representatives, holding their feet to the fire. If they say they support this, hold them to their word. And if they don't do what they say they're going to do, hold them accountable at the ballot box, okay? Because it's time for people to actually put up or shut up on this issue. Too many people are saying, yeah, it's a great idea, but then they do absolutely nothing about it.
Do you feel that they're doing that because they don't understand how to solve the problem, that they haven't themselves come forward to be informed about it?
I feel that they're doing it because they lack political courage. They don't want to do the right thing. They're afraid of what somebody might say in a letter to the editor. That's what I feel is happening.
You don't need to be lettered at this point.
This is a question for you, Chief Tupper. If you were to evaluate law enforcement across the state, what would you say the percentages of officers who support your position? Is it generally accepted?
You know, I don't know. That's a great question. I really don't know. I'll tell you that I'm fortunate. I'm a police chief. I'm appointed. I don't have to. I deal with politics, but I don't have to worry about getting reelected. Okay. I think it's a tougher issue for some of the sheriffs in our state. I think law enforcement's getting tired of chasing our tails dealing with these minor issues because we have very limited resources, okay? And there's a little thing called property tax reform that hit our state that might be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not talking for or against it, but it's limiting our resources. And I lost a police officer this past budget year because of property tax reform. So I have very limited resources. I have better things to do with my time than chase after people that don't have driver's licenses or no insurance. I think that regardless of how you feel about the immigration issue is a bigger issue than this. And in Iowa, the federal government's got to fix that, right? We can't really do much about it. We got to deal with the problems that we deal with here, okay? I think that this would solve a problem for us and allow us to have a safer community and allow us to devote our law enforcement resources to more important things. And I think it was Lori that mentioned the immigrant population is a very vulnerable population. I think if they had this ID card that says that they're welcome here, they're going to be more open to working with the police and working with local government and making their community better and not being afraid when the police come knocking, because, you know, we have a crime, maybe we have a burglary occur in a neighborhood. We're going to go knocking on doors because we want to see if any of the neighbors heard or saw anything. A lot of people won't talk to us because they're afraid we're also going to ask them about their immigration status, which, by the way, we never would, but they're still afraid of that. If they had that little card, I think a lot of those fears would go away, and I think it would make it easier for me to do my job.
Other questions? Questions from Erica? Would you repeat the question?
Oh, I was just indicating to Jessica's question. Chief Tupper took the leadership of putting together a letter, a sign-on letter for local law enforcement who are supportive and supportive of this initiative, and so far there's 9. So there's a copy for folks who want it back here, but that's a really great way for folks to be involved, actually, talking to local law enforcement.
Yeah, and actually the Police Chiefs Association asked me to speak to they're having a mini conference in September in Council Bluffs, so I'll be talking to them with a couple other chiefs about this topic. But that's a great point that Erica brought up. You know, I mentioned talk to your politicians, talk to your sheriff, talk to your local police chief, talk to your local mayor, elected representatives, tell them how you feel about this issue and get them involved. But we need everybody involved at this point.
I noticed you used the word unauthorized. Could you explain to me the difference between unauthorized and illegal?
You want that, Lori?
Yeah, well, wording's always difficult, but basically it just seems a little more descriptive to say, someone is here without authorization. Some people refer to that as an illegal immigrant, and I guess that's up to them to do that, but it's more descriptive of what their status is. They did not enter with an authorization, or they overstayed their authorization from the federal government to be here. So that's why they're not authorized. Now, it also isn't very specific to say illegal, because some people that don't have authorization for a while may gain it later. They may gain a legal status. So it's just a neutral way to talk about that. So I don't even know what the bill used. But the concept is that someone currently doesn't have an authorization to under the federal laws to be in the U.S. for, in an immigration status. That's who we're talking about. They can't get a driver's license now, because that's one of the points you have to prove in Iowa, is that you have a valid federal immigration status to get an Iowa driver's license. That's our current law. So what we're talking about is taking that aspect out, but making those cards distinct so that if someone doesn't have a federal valid immigration status, it will be clear from the face of the card. So that's really what we're talking about here. I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah.
Also a question for you along the same lines. So what is the cost for somebody to go through the naturalization process in Iowa? What's the success rate? How long does it take?
Wow, that's a question that could take like an hour, but let me give you the very, very quick one is that the immigration law is federal, so it's not different in Iowa anywhere else. Naturalization is kind of the end point of a very long journey from when you might want to come to the U.S. or have some relative sponsor you or an employer sponsor you. So what you're talking about for people that even can traverse that journey, because it's a very limited population that can traverse the journey because our immigration laws are very limited, all right? So it's not like, your great-grandparents that said, I think I'll get on a boat and go over to America. That doesn't happen anymore because you have to go to all these different things. So my grandparent would never have immigrated. But in any event, if you're in that population, you're talking thousands of dollars and many, many, many years, depending again on how you do it. But most, and not all, okay, but most of the people we're talking about in this population are people that either wouldn't have any way to do this at all, or the way is so long, like in the 20s of years, that it's not practically going to be attainable. So we're not talking about people that just didn't want to go down to the consulate and pay $1,000. We're talking about people that had no other way to escape what they're escaping. So that's what we're talking about. So I don't know if that helps, but I'd be glad to talk about you later. Yeah. Yeah.
It can be a 10-year process, and there's a large portion of the immigrants that can never make it through. So they're in a limbo period during this period of time that they're here.
Good point. Yes. Yes, in a limbo, and it's not the federal law is dysfunctional at this moment, so we're just saying, we just need to know who's here and they need to be able to drive. We'll deal with the other one later. Yeah.
And even if you have a way to get your immigration status, it takes so long. So my brothers put their papers in there, they were approved, they just have to be waiting. It's 12 years already and they don't even get nothing yet. So
there you go. Yeah. Good example. Yeah. Yeah.